This video is brought to you by Mubi. Let me show you my favorite cut from 2020. This cut happens in the opening minutes of First Cow. While most of the film is set in the 1820s, the film opens in the present. The film's first image is a massive barge, establishing a modern setting. The surrounding nature doesn't give us any information about the time period, only the season. The boats on the river, the distant sounds of ground and air traffic in the background, and the woman's clothes are the only things that anchor us to the present. And then the woman uncovers two skeletons, a link to some time in the past, and we get this cut. A massive jump into the past is established with a close-up of the toe of a boot. The worn boot is immediately recognizable as something from a bygone era, establishing the period in the same way the woman's clothes established the present. Though this image alone cannot be placed in time, it immediately feels older to us in contrast to the following image. Everything in the frame looks decayed. In contrast to the next frame, it lacks color. The fallen leaves are more dried and dead here. There's no new growth. And the skeletons are in contrast to the living human in the next frame. This doesn't just help us recognize that we're moving back in time with this cut, it also establishes a theme that the film touches on later.
But this is still new. More nameless things around here than you can shake an eel at.
It creates an interesting duality, even though in the timeline of the story, this image is more recent and closer to us than this one. This one appears newer and more alive.
Doesn't seem new to me. Seems old.
First Cow, one of my favorite films from 2020 and one of the best edited films of the year, was edited by the director, Kelly Reichardt. I've seen many people describe the film as gentle, and much of this certainly has to do with the personality of the main character.
Sorry about your husband. I heard he didn't make it all the way.
The music, and the pacing of the film, but I think there's also a gentleness in the editing of the film and the way Reichardt builds suspense and explores the film's themes. On the surface, First Cow is a simple story about friendship, but it explores much larger and heavier themes of environmentalism, colonialism, and classism in its periphery. It's how Reichardt uses the edges of the frame and the periphery of the story in the editing, direction, and sound design to explore these themes that gives a film with such serious and heavy themes its gentle feeling. Critical to understanding what Reichardt is doing in First Cow is understanding how she's suggesting a larger world and story instead of just showing us one. Here's an example. In the opening scene, instead of showing a series of images that establish a modern industrial landscape, Reichardt uses the sounds of the modern world in the background to suggest it. We see the boat, but we also hear a train, a highway, and airplanes. This alludes to the end results of certain attitudes she shows later in the film.
I disagree. The beaver here are endless.
It's a subtle connection that illuminates a theme that could have been explored in a much more heavy-handed way, but instead Reichardt uses what's in the background audibly to gently suggest it, and leaves it to us to put together the pieces. She also does this visually, like in this scene where we can see how a tent in the background and a man passing on a boat are emphasized visually, even though they have nothing to do with the plot and have nothing to do with the action the main characters are involved in. Reichardt uses a similar technique in editing to develop a rich world of characters in the periphery of the protagonists. Here's what I mean. In most scenes in any film, you have a primary thread of action involving the protagonists or the characters who are the focus of the scene. This action makes up the core of the scene. There may also be elements that frame the scene, like establishing shots of the location or the actions or reactions of extras or side characters, things that help contextualize the main action. But these things usually aren't given much attention or screen time in the overall scheme of the film. What Reichardt does is spend an extended amount of time in these contextual moments, usually focusing on establishing the beginning or end of a scene around a side character. Here's an example. In this scene at the bar, the elements of the scene that are important to the plot are Cookie overhearing a conversation about the cow,
First cow in the territory,
and Cookie reuniting with King Lou.
Hello, Cookie.
But Reichardt spends a significant amount of time focusing on an interaction between two side characters.
Hey, I'm not bothering him. I'm just asking him an honest question. What about the chicken and the egg?
Which leads to a fight that happens off screen. And then when our protagonists leave the scene,
You wait here. All right? Your daddy will be back soon.
instead of ending the scene when they leave, Reichardt lingers for some time, focusing on the baby, a character we'll never see again. Where most filmmakers would cut quickly away from characters that are essentially extras or side characters, Reichardt chooses to stay. Here's another example. In this scene, the action that the plot is primarily concerned with ends.
We'll have more tomorrow.
But instead of cutting the scene off here, Reichardt stays with a minor character who gets cheated out of his spot in line and doesn't get to get a cake. By doing this in scene after scene, Reichardt suggests a depth and richness to the environment that surrounds the protagonists. We get a sense that there are other stories happening around them simultaneously. In a way, this approach to storytelling is seen even in who Reichardt has chosen for her protagonists. Cookie himself is the kind of person who would normally be a side character in a Western. The sort of masculine stereotypes that are usually the subject matter of the genre exist in the film, but they themselves are in the background and the fringes of the story. I want to talk about how this idea connects back to the opening cut and another cut in the film that I love, possibly even more, but to do this I'll have to spoil the film, so go watch it before you watch the rest of this video. One of the things that's beautiful about this opening cut that I love so much is that it's also part of this suggestion of important elements off screen that I have been talking about. It implies a connection between the skeletons and the human in the next frame. It's not a connection that you really understand when you first see it, but as the film wears on and you realize that its focus is on two central characters, it starts to dawn on you that the two skeletons belong to our main characters, and that this opening cut is a perverse sort of secret match cut. The vision of these two skeletons haunts the film, and it's one of the many ways Reichardt is subtly infusing the film with suspense that slowly builds and becomes quite intense at the end. One of these characters at the periphery, whose desire to get an oily cake is continually thwarted, eventually becomes the greatest threat to the main characters. Caught in their illicit milk acquisition and pursued at threat of death,
Kill him.
Cookie needs to lie down because of his head injury. The protagonists lay resting in a position you might recognize from 2 hours earlier in the film. And then, here comes my other favorite cut. The film ends. The hard cut from the skeletons into the past and the hard cut from the two friends resting to black creates an editing pattern that reinforces the link between the two images. The relationship between the two allows us to infer a violent act that happens off screen, coming from a threat at the periphery. Reichardt places one of the darkest and most significant events in the film off screen, merely suggesting it through mise-en-scene and editing. She actually does this throughout the film with any kind of violence, pushing it into the background or off screen. And this is a big part of what I think gives the film its gentle feel. Even though it's a sad story, deals with some heavy themes and is quite suspenseful, these elements are pieces Reichardt gives to you to put together yourself. You experience them as realizations, implied rather than shown. Every film has some elements of plot, setting, and character backstory that are simply suggested and pushed into the background or off screen. But in First Cow, Reichardt puts some of the most important aspects of the story in that position. And a big part of how she does that is through how and when she. Thank you to Mubi for sponsoring this video. Mubi is an online streaming cinema featuring an ever-fresh collection of hand-picked films. I talked about it a few weeks ago in a video, but one of my favorite directors, Yorgos Lanthimos' new short film Nimic, is available now on Mubi. Mubi is available in 190 countries, it's available on any screen, any device, anywhere, and you'll never see a single ad. The Mubi library has hundreds of great hand-picked films, and every day there's a new film available for you to watch. Give yourself a belated Christmas gift by signing up for a free 30-day trial of Mubi. You can do that by clicking the link in the description or going to mubi.com/ThomasFlight. That's mubi.com/ThomasFlight for your 30-day free trial. Thanks again to Mubi for another year of supporting the work I do on this channel.